Hi, Cinematic Enthuse here, and was just wanting to run the video a bit for just to see what comes to me about this forum. Um, I sometimes wonder if I want to do this in order to talk about aesthetics more than anything else, or, I mean, obviously, it's just to, there's a couple reasons why I do this channel or why I keep coming back to music and movies. One is for therapy. Another is for just relaxation, which I guess could be underneath therapy as well. Another is because I've been engrossed in music my whole life, and I've been, in the theater, uh, not recently, but I spent a lot of time, and I spent probably even more time in movie theaters. And I suppose maybe I should just go ahead and tell you about one of my first experiences with classic film. As I will mention a lot of times on this channel, I grew up with my grandparents, at least from the time I was 8 or 9 years old till I was about 12, and those are really important years, as you well know. Um, and they were very instrumental, no pun intended, in my life. And so one of the things that they did was I think I must have been 8 or 9 years old. And so this would have been like 1978 or 9, okay? And I remember we were at the beach, we were at the Jersey Shore, and there was a retirement home that they knew of. And we went over there because they would have these movies like maybe once or twice a week for all the senior citizens there. And the reason my grandparents wanted to go, they weren't quite they were semi retired at that point. They weren't completely retired, they were still working. Um, they just really wanted to see these old movies on the big screen. And it wasn't technically a theater, it was more like almost like a auditorium where they probably had like little meetings, and they had a tiny stage and stuff, and I think they had a piano off to the side, like a mess hall type place. But I don't know if you remember this, because I don't remember the dimensions. Those of you who know film really well will know. But it wasn't the size of a grand movie theater screen, okay? But it was one of those projector ones that was really wide. So it was a stand up model. And of course, they had a film in the back. I'm sure at that point it wasn't VHS or beta. This was not like projected from VHS or beta. They had film strip, I'm pretty sure, film strip at this point, somehow. And they played it on this, it was a pretty big screen. I mean, of course, I was a kid, so maybe it seemed bigger than it really was, but I know it wasn't as big as a movie screen, okay? But it was certainly bigger than a TV or even a widescreen television like today. So that helped a lot. I remember the chairs were very uncomfortable, of course. They were those typical, metal chairs that were always really uncomfortable. But considering I was so young and the chairs were so uncomfortable, and I remember it was very cold inside there, it was one of those drafty kind of halls. But I saw Notorious, 1946, I believe. Alfred Hitchcock, Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, Claude Rains, um, several other people. I can't think of their names right now. Um, Especially the woman who plays Claude Rains' mother, and she's got a Russian sounding name or a Czech sounding name, but she was amazing. Um, that was, I think, my first classic film, and I think will always remain a like landmark memory of mine, because I don't think I had ever seen black and white film in that size. It was so. Let's forget about the story for a minute, because that was pretty pivotal. But seeing a black and white film when you're a kid in a quasi like movie theater. That just, plus it was Alfred Hitchcock, who I later learned out, excuse me, later learned about him, of course, as many people know about him now. But, back in the 70s, people were talking about him, but he wasn't nearly as, like, he was kind of beginning to get that revival. That, of course, in the 80s, he had a revival, and, in the 90s, by that time, Roger Ebert and everybody was talking about him. Um, so this was kind of like, the 70s were kind of like the, where you would hear people, like, I think even Woody Allen was making films where he was talking about, like, Humphrey Bogart and stuff like that. So classic films were starting to be, like, rotated and stuff like that, at least in certain markets and certain places throughout the United States and throughout the world. So, seeing that black and white cinematography, I don't know, there's just something about it. I just will never forget that, just seeing that. It's just mind blowing. And there's that famous shot that I always come back to this shot, and I think there's been books written about it, and the famous shot that he comes down. I think he was on a, do you call it, forgive me, I don't remember what the name of the technical term is, but it's like the chair that's suspended, the director's chair. I don't know if it's a dolly or not, but he literally was up on the second floor practically with his camera, and they slowly descended down to the lower level to Ingrid Bergman's The Key that she's holding in her hand. That just blew me away. And there was no books written about it that I knew of at that time. I just was seeing this for the first time. And I think when you experience something first and then find out about it years later, it's really lovely. And now it's good to know things like before going into a film so that you can know what to look for. But there's other times when you just want to be wowed by, not just by the story or the acting, but the cinematography, And years later, I was talking to my sister, who knows about film as well. She almost went to film school, actually. And I told her, I said, why is Hitchcock so interesting, in that respect, besides, he's really good at directing actors in terms of getting really great performances out of them, whether they're screwed up. His methods were screwed up, but, why is his camera work so amazing? And she just summed it up in one sentence. She goes, oh, well, he studied with silent filmmakers, German silent filmmakers. I was like, oh, okay. So, and I guess if you know a lot about silent film, which I don't, I've seen some and I really appreciate it, but I don't necessarily watch it all the time. I've certainly seen, I haven't seen all of the famous ones, but I've seen several. Obviously, I've seen some silent comedies, but I've seen some Eisenstein, not all of the famous ones. I don't think I've technically made it all the way through Battleship Potemkin yet, but I have seen Strike, I think it is, and I've seen his work. And then I've seen, actually, German Silence. I don't know if I've seen, I'd have to look up and see if I've seen any of those. Although I think Eisenstein was German. Maybe he was Russian. It's probably Russian. So, as you can tell, I don't always have the exact facts that you can look up in Google yourself for details, but that's okay. So, what I'm getting at is I think that just really made a huge impression on me. I think that kind of like, of course, I had been to movies before I was 9 years old. I'd been to, like, you know, um, Disney movies, and I had been to, I think I had even been to some drama movies. I remember going to see a Sylvester Stallone drama movie. I think it was called Fist. And it was some kind of like mob movie or something, and I haven't seen it since then. And I know I saw some other dramas when I was really young, but I also saw, like the typical kids movies that were back then. The Apple Dumpling Gang and the Disney type movies, or they were live action kids movies. But I certainly saw at a young age, maybe not entirely appropriately, but I didn't see R-rated movies until, well, I did see an R-rated movie when I was, I think, 8 or 9, but I was with my parents, and it was not that bad. I think it was like North Dallas 40 or something. I mean, that's not that bad of a movie in terms of there's maybe some nudity or something. But long story short, you know, I had seen enough movies to have something to compare it to. It's not like it was the first movie I ever saw. But there's a huge difference, even at the age of 9, when you're seeing a black and white screen in front of you and it's Cary Grant. And I didn't know who Cary Grant was at that point. I had seen a picture of him, or maybe there was a commercial or something, advertising some, or maybe my grandparents had some kind of, I don't know, reference to him, or I don't remember. I knew who he was. I kind of knew who Ingrid Bergman was a little bit. She looked familiar to me. I think at that point she was making, this probably was before she made the Golda Meir movie. I think she was still acting at this point. So I knew kind of who she was, sort of. I had no idea who Claude Rains was. I had never seen him before. And I don't think I really even knew who Hitchcock was. Um, so I wasn't walking in there knowing what the heck I was going to see. I just was going with my grandparents to a movie. And I think the scene that got to me the most, well, there was a couple scenes that got to me the most, but I'll never forget being completely in suspense when, well, okay, I won't spoil it for you because there's probably somebody out there who hasn't seen Notorious yet, and I don't want to ruin it for you. But there's a scene in the wine cellar, and that's all I'm going to say. And, well, there's a couple scenes in the wine cellar, but there's a very pivotal moment in the wine cellar. And I remember being on pins and needles during that scene. And I remember thinking to myself, like, as I'm sure later on I probably thought about it more, but I remember not being that engrossed in a movie until that point. And the reason I bring this up is that I was doing a little bit of, not research, but just trying to listen to some people. One of them is a former film professor, Janine Basinger, who, if you want to YouTube her, she's got some really interesting talks about, she's actually an author too, but I just like listening to people like that every once in a while just to kind of remember what it is I like about old Hollywood. She's very good at verbalizing those things, probably because her background's a little bit different than most people in that she was an usher in the 40s at a movie theater. So she really got to see firsthand, and then of course she became a film professor. But what she reminded me of as I was listening to one of her YouTubes today was that classic film, 1930s, 40s, 50s, some 60s, and I guess there's some of this in the 70s and 80s. It depends on the film. But pretty consistently, the people, the great directors, and there was so many of them, and even the ones that weren't that great, they still did a good job of this. They would get you into their world, and you were with them for the hour and a half or 2 hours or however long the movie was, and they had you. So they took you on this journey, and they had you. And if they lost you along the way, that's usually where the film fails at some point. But if they could grab a kid who's never been to a black and white film before, has never seen, doesn't know anything about anything except a few familiar faces, but that's it. No point of reference or anything. And just through the cinematography, I mean, the shadow and the light and the close-ups and the camera angles where he turns it up, I mean, all sorts of stuff. I mean, you just don't see that anymore. And I know it's common in noir. Everybody loves noir. Noir, 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 noir. Yes, Notorious, I guess, could be looped in with the noirs. Um, I love the noir genre for its beauty in terms of camera work, but I can only take so many stories of depression. Noir is a lot of very, 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 very depressing stories, I think. And I just can't take a lot of that. Um, there's certain kinds of noirs that I like, that I can watch. The ones like, maybe the more detective type ones, I think I tend to like a little more because it's a puzzle. So, and I don't watch Hitchcock all the time either. But there was a time, I'd say probably once video got out. So this is, late 70s when I saw my first Hitchcock film and my first black and white film, my first classic film, everything. It was the first film I think I ever saw that was old Hollywood. Wizard of Oz, I probably saw that around the same time, but that was on TV. It's completely different. You know, I got to see this in a almost theater. It wasn't a theater, but it was almost a theater. So that's like apples and oranges. I mean, Wizard of Oz is great, of course. I mean, it's stellar. But if I would have seen that in the real theater, that would have been amazing. Black or white or color, it doesn't matter. So, but that didn't happen. So, I was just lucky to see Notorious. And then get this, the second film I saw, and I think that was probably the last time I saw any of those projector films because I only went there twice. Gave me so many nightmares, way more nightmares than, I mean, I didn't even have nightmares with Notorious. But the second film I saw was The Spiral Staircase. And if you've seen The Spiral Staircase, you'll know why I had nightmares. I mean, I don't think most 9 or 10 year olds should be seeing that movie. But then again, I think I saw The Little Girl Who Lives Down the Lane when I was like 6 years old, and that was a stupid thing to watch at 6 years of age. I think I was at babysitter's that night. There was just a lot of horror. You'll hear me complain about horror because I think the only kind of horror I would actually watch is the really beautifully shot ones, the black and white ones from the 40s or something like that. Or if there's some kind of like suspense theme to it, that isn't totally gory. I just can't handle it anymore. So, that's where I'm different from my generation. Practically grew up on horror movies, and so I'm not like other people my age. Practically everybody I know who's my age absolutely loves all the Nightmare on Elm Street movies and all that crap. I can't handle that stuff. I never liked it. I didn't like it as a teenager. I remember my friends used to drag me to those horror movies, and I kind of went along because I wanted to hang out with my friends, but I just didn't like them. Now, if we would have been going to like, Val Lewton movies or whatever, is that his name? He was a really good, he was an amazing cameraman, and I think he did some of those 1940s horror movies. Maybe I would have gotten something out of it, like I would have been really wowed by the camera work and stuff, but no such luck. Um, and no disrespect to Wes Craven. I think Wes Craven, in terms of like horror, I mean he's probably as good as it gets, but I just don't like the genre. Okay, it's got its place, that's for sure. But I think when things are overrated, like nowadays, everybody and their brother who's into classic film is either into noir, some version of horror, which is usually, which is fine, the Val Lewton stuff or I can't think of the other guy's name. There's several other 40s, 30s and 40s black and white. The Bela Lugosi and the Boris Karloff and all that business. Which again for cinematography and direction is like amazing. Those people were, and the actors were amazing. They all were just above and beyond what we have today. But I just don't go out of my way to watch them. Um, but even compared to noir is so like that's it. When people say classic film now on like Turner Classic movies or Any of these places, it's like it's just noir. That's it. Or maybe dramas. And the niche, like the afterthoughts, are comedy and maybe musicals. And the musicals they pick are like Oklahoma, which is fine. You know, it's a fine musical. They're just not interesting musicals to me. Um, the comedies they pick, I don't think are funny. You'll notice this is kind of a video that's a little bit about my first experiences with classic film, and now I'm going to rant a little bit. Uh, but I'm just letting you know where my aesthetics are at. I don't like Billy Wilder as a director. I like Billy Wilder as a writer. I like him with Charles Brackett. I think they did a great job as a team. I think he had a good sense of comedy, but I don't like his direction. I don't like Some Like It Hot as much as everyone else does. I think it's okay, but is it the greatest, funniest comedy ever made? No. Is Jack Lemmon a genius? Yes. Totally love Jack Lemmon. Absolutely adore Jack Lemmon. You know, the first movie I saw him in was not a comedy. It was a terrifying nuclear, the China Syndrome. Scared the crap out of me. Again, I think I was like 8 years old when I saw that. It was on HBO. Scared the crap out of me. I think it scares anybody. Great movie. Jane Fonda, Michael Douglas, probably the three greatest performances of the three of those people, or at least the top three greatest performances of their career. Each one of them, if not maybe not the greatest, but the top three, you know, for sure. Um, but back to like Some Like It Hot. People go like when people talk about screwball comedy, they always talk about these movies that I could care less about. Some Like It Hot, another one that I can't stand, and I don't know why. I just don't like it. My Man Godfrey. I like uh, William Powell and I like Carol Lombard. I just don't know why I don't. And I like social classes being kind of talked about. In fact, you might hear me talk about the social classes um, more in this forum. But for some reason, I just don't like that movie. Now, maybe I'll come back to it and I'll be like, okay, I like it now. Um, there's certain movies that, like, certain people that I think are fabulous in screwball comedy that don't get talked about nearly as much as other people. Carol Lombard is always talked about. I think she's very good, but I don't see as many people talking about Claudette Colbert, who I think is brilliant, and who Melvin Douglas isn't talked about very much. He's brilliant. Um, you know, I know there's certain people who are into the niche, who are into screwball comedy, and who know Gregory LaCava and Mitchell Leisen and um, you know, the great Preston Sturgis and of course Howard Hawks and I'm sure I'm going to miss a couple other people, but there's other people who maybe only made a few here and there, but who are very, you know, delightful and stuff. But they get overlooked for other genres usually, and so I just feel like those people need to be lifted up too and like, you know, recognized and especially if you're into entertainment as movie, or I should say movie as entertainment. If you want to get swept up into a world where you don't have to like process your emotions through crying or sadness or fear, I think that's why I like screwball comedies and musicals, because if it's written really well and the jokes fly really fast, like maybe His Girl Friday, or even in the case of It's Love I'm After, which I just saw recently, and you know, if you can watch the video on that, the jokes fly not as fast as His Girl Friday, but they move along, and you can say that about a lot of screwball comedies. They move along, and it's really hard to, if you watch it over and over and over, or let's say you watch it once and then you come back to it in a couple months. There's a lot of stuff that you'll get the next time that you missed the first time because it's written. Every line is so well crafted. Um, because they had amazing writers, and they had a whole team of them. And it's interesting. This is also what Janine Basinger reminded me of. She said, "You got to remember with the studio system, 1930s, 1960s, they had fully staffed, you know, writers, fully staffed orchestras, fully staffed costumers." She said they would have people. She was talking about musicals at the time. She said they would have fully staffed people who would literally time out the dance with a stopwatch, and they were paid to like literally know how many steps each each dance would be and how long it would take, because they had to budget everything, you know. So, and then we all know that they always had like a huge roster of actors and actresses, singers, dancers, performers, you know, not to mention all the technicians and the stage, the stage technicians and the props and the set people and all those people, the people who built these amazing sets in the studio. And I mean, thousands of people, you know. So when you have that many people on the payroll for these movies, you know, there's more at stake. But on the other hand, there's also like a higher probability of high quality because you have people constantly doing their craft all the time, you know, like maybe a little too much, as I mentioned in another video, because, um, you know, they did get overworked. Um, and that's obviously sad and unfortunate. But, you know, sometimes with, I'm not saying I think it's good that they got overworked. I'm just saying you can see the standards, the benchmark was just so high, you know. But also, maybe the benchmark could get that high because they were fully staffed and because they had such a huge roster of people. Whether it's MGM, obviously MGM had a, you know, probably one of the bigger payrolls. But I think also Paramount had a pretty huge system. And of course, 20th Century Fox and some of these other places, maybe not on the level of MGM, but, you know, Columbia and some of these other places. Um, so, you know, the probability of great quality is going to probably go up, right? And, but thanks to them, I mean, you know, you can tell I don't have really a huge agenda here, like, but I'm just telling you things that bother me and things that I love. But I'll wrap it up now because it's 27 minutes. But I think that just to give you an idea of aesthetics and things, I just really love those things. Great writing, great acting, witty dialogue, um, something that gets you. I do tend to be kind of like, I do love the let's put on a show musicals. Those are fun. And I do love the career women comedies and the screwball comedies where, and I think a lot of them were supposed to do this, where the roles are reversed. At least the roles are reversed traditionally. You know, the woman chases the man, or, you know, maybe the man dresses up as a woman, or it was for the 30s. It was very much role reversal, of course. I mean, we all know in the 30s it was like, well, to be fair, in some ways the 30s were a little more progressive than they are now. But anyway, um, but yeah, so there's like usually kind of like a switch of things that happens in a screwball comedy, and there's usually like a social classes thing that happens, like where the upper class and the lower class are kind of like, you get to laugh at the upper classes at their expense, and that was especially fitting because of the depression. And when that happens, that's super. um, but there's also some neat things that happens where people from the upper class are put into situations with the lower classes, and they get to kind of see things from the other side, and it's kind of a nice, a little more friendly way of seeing how someone else lives. And that is kind of healing to watch that, you know. So yeah, So I have no idea what our next movie will be or our next music piece or whatever. But if you have any ideas, let me know. I have a few that I can certainly, delve into. But I just thought I'd like yammer on for about 30 minutes about this stuff. And so leave me a comment if you like, and talk to you soon.